The US is destroying your future. You see, when you're born, you automatically sign a social contract, an agreement to submit to the government. Everybody does this for generations. You give up some of your natural freedoms in exchange for the benefits of living under the rule of your nation's government. You will pay tax, obey the law, and work for the greater good in exchange for money, public services, infrastructure, police, and stability. In America, you specifically sign this contract in exchange for the pursuit of happiness and prosperity. For generations before, this contract was one of the best in history. Americans prospered. Its people became the richest in the world with the most freedoms you could ever ask for. It was the most free, richest, and most inspiring country in the world. The American dream was the mantra that made the entire world envious of America, because anybody, regardless of age, class, or race, could make it. Anybody could make it to buy a huge house, have a beautiful lawn, raise a happy family, with loving neighbors, community, ultimately allowing you to find true happiness. But today, it's becoming a whole other picture. You see, for the first time in American history, you're probably making less money than your parents did. Younger generations are far less happy than their parents and grandparents. On average, all studies show that Americans today are deeply unhappy. And yet for older generations, they're some of the happiest in the world. You're probably also far less adjusted than any of your family's previous generations. And it's not hard to notice. Protests are everywhere. Universities are being desecrated, American flags being ripped down. Patriotism is falling to an all-time low. The country more divided, extremism rising. People everywhere are rejecting the social contract with America, as younger generations don't own anything, perpetually living off of subscriptions to food, housing, entertainment, games, gyms, cars, credit card debt. Nothing is real or owned anymore. People perpetually exist as temporary facets to an increasingly artificial existence. Why? The current prosperity of the home-owning older generation is propped up by debt for future generations. We are meant to pass on our wealth to our descendants, not hoard it for ourselves and only pass on debt. Credit card and overdraft debt has been normalized, expected even. Look at credit ratings. If you're seen to borrow and pay interest, credit companies are more likely to give you credit. If you take a more mature and sensible approach to your own finances and live prudently within your means, you have a credit rating of 0 and cannot borrow money or get a mortgage, aka own a house. What happened in 2008? Massive government bailout. Instead of banks being nationalized, countries came under the private control of banks. In other words, the US was sold off, and the results? A changing America and Western world. Some may think it's good that America is changing, but change is only good when it makes things better, which by all metrics it's not. Now, lots of people, especially in the boomer generation, may point to the S&P 500 or industry graphs that show rising GDP levels. And yes, if you have assets and have been deeply invested in the American markets for years, you'd be thinking that America has never been so great and successful. And this is what it looks like by looking at the economic graphs. But if you're a regular person or just finishing college, you won't see any of this. In fact, wage growth over the last few years compared to the S&P is astronomically lower. Years ago, boomers would have full-time jobs and would be paid a reasonable wage. Your local postman could afford a nice house in a loving neighborhood. People were content with their income, which is why elderly poverty is down to the lowest levels in American history. But child poverty, well, that's at the highest levels ever. Why? Why, if the economy is growing, public funding in schools failing so badly? Why is the younger generation suffering so much in America? And in the digital age, where our personal information feels more like public property, it's alarming to see just how accessible our data is to predators and data brokers. That's why I want to tell you about our video sponsor, Aura. You see, data brokers sell your information to anyone interested, scammers, spammers, you name it. Your full name, email, home address, health records, and even details about your relatives, it's all out there. That's why I've turned to Aura. Aura meticulously scans for data brokers peddling my information, and steps in to automatically submit opt-out requests on my behalf. Imagine logging into Aura and finding out just how many brokers are exploiting your personal information. But here's the kicker. Cleaning up my digital footprints with Aura does more than just cut down on the annoying spam. It's a crucial step in safeguarding my accounts, from social media to banking, against hackers who could exploit this freely available information. I don't know if you saw this, but AT&T revealed that over 72 million customer records, both existing and former customers, were released on the dark web. They recommended those affected use strong passwords, monitor account activity, and consider credit freezes or fraud alerts from credit bureaus. Well, Aura does all of this for me, and best of all, I don't have to download several different apps just because the company couldn't keep my data secure. If my info was compromised in the AT&T data breach, I wouldn't worry, because Aura is always on, always doing the hard work of keeping me safe. So make sure to check out aura.com/moon. Link in the description to start your 2-week free trial today. I mean, a young American today going through the state education system is increasingly looking at a future of becoming an Uber Eats driver, renting rather than owning anything, and yet being intelligent enough and painfully aware of all the opportunities that exist for the wealthy, and in particular, their parents. It's often shown that children of rich parents, rather than being spoiled and not actually working, in fact have an opposite reaction. In all likelihood, they have more of a reason to work hard, knowing that they can be rewarded with a bright future and become like their parents. And with a lovely soft safety net behind them, why not go for their dreams? But for the average student, the future is a dull, low-paid job and a rented home in a neighborhood, seemingly abandoned by the authorities, with tranq, fentanyl, plaguing their streets, tents everywhere, and yet you'll still pay all of your wage to live in these places. And how can teachers who are dramatically underpaid and underfunded by the government ever inspire students when they themselves are completely uninspired, unmotivated, and unable to afford anything? So is it really any surprise that students in America are feeling more nihilistic than ever before? Is it any surprise they're dropping out of the workforce like flies? Public schools in the US rely heavily on local property taxes to fund their operations, and the effects of this are starting to show, as not all schools are this underfunded, not all schools have uninspired students, but it seems like the system perpetuates disparities in funding between wealthy and low-income communities, as schools in affluent areas benefit from higher property tax revenues, while schools in impoverished areas struggle to make ends meet. In addition to this, many states have faced budget cuts and austerity measures, leading to reductions in funding for public education. These cuts have forced schools to operate with limited resources, resulting in large class sizes, staff layoffs, and program cuts for the arts and creative subjects. The creative heart of America that's inspired the world and continues to shape the world culture is being defunded. The US has the power, wealth, and resources to improve the public school system. More importantly, it has the power to make life better for those at the poorest end of the social spectrum. Alleviating social problems at source takes the burden off of schools. This is the nation that put man on the moon, that leads the world in technological advancements, that is the pillar of freedom across the world, the nation on the brink of an AI revolution, but it still chooses not to invest that much in its young people. And as a result of this underfunded public school system, there's kind of worrying trend of anti-Americanism in schools.
They're changing the values and the morals of children to hate the country. That's the problem. That's not education.
Do you know that they're doing that though?
Yes, 100%.
Resentment piling up from both teachers and students alike, where young students are then taught to hate the West, their history, culture, and values, something which is happening all across the Western world. And it's only 10 times worse in universities, where people are literally ripping down American flags across the country, where people are taught to think radically, where their bleak economic future deepens their frustrations with the country. Students become divided, others become more radical, some become more normal, more patriotic, and a loud majority of people are rejecting the system. And at the same time, all of these students are being charged hundreds of thousands for the privilege. I mean, just 30 years ago, as Scott Galloway pointed out, a student could get admitted to UCLA with a grade point average GPA between 2.2 and 2.3.
And then, out of UCLA, I got a 2.27 GPA. For those of you that don't know, that's not very good. The whole point is to give unremarkable people a chance of being remarkable.
Now, applicants to Ivy League universities are expected to have GPAs that are close to or above a 4.0, and the cost of college education as a percentage of first-year income has nearly trebled since the parents of the current undergrads were at college. Having a higher education should be available to all if you're willing to work hard. It shouldn't be so exclusive, where the top politicians' children somehow all get admitted to Ivy League colleges, while regular average day people have a 0.1% chance of ever actually getting accepted. Somehow most politicians have all of their children in Ivy League schools, along with all the donors to these universities getting all of their kids passed through.
Now another admissions scandal looms over one of the most prestigious schools in the world. The Boston Globe reports there was a different kind of college recruitment scam at Harvard University. It allegedly involves a series of donations, a land deal, and a real estate purchase from a Chinese millionaire who wanted his 2 sons admitted to the school.
Whereas the rest of America is almost completely excluded. This is a deliberate and corrupt policy to make places at top universities rare, whilst also milking all their students dry to the bone, increasing profits, increasing division across America, and increasing exclusivity, rather than providing the chance for advancement for ordinary people. So the system now in place is that it is more and more expected for anyone looking for a job away from the gig economy to have a degree, as the market and culture punishes and demonizes those who don't, while those who do pursue a college course channel money into a super wealthy institution, and in doing so burden themselves with lifelong debt and a deeply frustrated, twisted outlook of the world thanks to their radical professors. I mean, is there any wonder that the boomer generation is worried about the younger generations turning their back on the values that build the country to begin with, if the younger people are being pushed into a system that makes it almost impossible not to? This is a huge problem, and it's a great benefit to the adversaries of America, something that urgently needs to be fixed. Because if the younger generation lose their patriotism and love of their country, then who will stand up for America and the Western world in times of need? It's critical this changes, otherwise the West faces a very big challenge in the next decade. And I say the West, as this education process is becoming all too familiar across Europe. But of course, not everybody's being pushed to be unpatriotic. However, almost everyone is being pushed into poisoning themselves. The introduction of processed foods, high in sugars, fats, and artificial additives, alongside the widespread use of pesticides and other chemicals in agriculture, has raised alarms about the long-term health effects on children and adolescents. Towns and cities across America are filled to the brim with chains that offer no healthy food, apart from oily, greasy slop. In fact, we actually made an entire video going into this topic specifically. But for the most part, many know the FDA's food regulation standards are letting through foods that should never be eaten on a regular basis, especially not for the youth. Drinks and tap water with forever chemicals.
A new study finds that nearly half of the nation's drinking water contains potentially harmful forever chemicals. The substances have been linked to several serious health problems, including some cancers.
Ingredient lists on food full of emulsifiers and other trash you've never heard of before, wrecking the microbiomes of millions, robbing the young of their energy and health, the two fundamental things to ever rise up in the world. Even just foods you think would only have one or two ingredients like nuggets or a burger is far from what you ever think it is. They're packed with fat, salt, sugar, and other unhealthy ingredients. Fast food barely fills you up and slowly deteriorates your body. It makes you crave things like Coke.
We all know it, that formula at McDonald's, why that's the best tasting Coke and Diet Coke on the planet.
Why?
There's definitely a different formula at McDonald's.
Oh, has there been anything written about this?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
If you drive by a McDonald's and you get a Diet Coke, you'll be like, what the f***?
And it's not just about the nutritional emptiness, it's also about the experience and the brain's chemical response that fuels a lifelong addiction in most of the youth of America. Fast, ultra-processed food is intrinsically harmful, and yet in most food deserts across America, what other choice do you have, other than eating slop that makes you fatigued, obese, and full of lethargy? And yet this ultra-processed food constitutes 73% of the nation's total food supply, and America's demanding work and school culture leaves people with little time or energy to prepare themselves wholesome meals daily. The convenience and addictive nature of such food makes it an easy habit to fall into, a survival mechanism to conserve energy. However, this ease of access is impairing the nation's functionality and reducing the average citizen's ability to thrive. A stark example is found in the US military, full of America's youth, which is currently missing its recruitment goal by 15,000 people annually. And the shortfall isn't due to a lack of winning recruits, but because many who apply are actually unfit for service. Issues like drug use, mental health problems, and most notably the obesity crisis are significant barriers, echoing Nietzsche's warnings about decadence. Historically, gluttony and overeating were luxuries reserved only for the elite, as most people engaged in too much physical labor or had limited access to food. However, it's now being inversed, where the rich and powerful elites have access to tasty, healthy food, whereas the rest of America has to eat the toxic slop. Which is why the average American now eats 60 hamburgers per year. Every second across America, 350 slices of pizza are consumed. They say you are what you eat, and so what does this mean about the future generation of America? I mean, studies show a strong association between a diet rich in heavily processed food and a lower IQ. So what does that say when 60% of the standard American diet comes from heavily processed foodstuffs? And on the other side, if you do want to be healthy, all of your vegetables are probably saturated with pesticides and carcinogenic chemicals, like companies like Monsanto. I mean, what happens to a civilization that poisons their own children? Children are raised with hundreds of grams of sugar as infants, told they have ADHD because they can't sit in their chair for 8 hours, and are consequently prescribed Ritalin as the solution? Hardcore stimulants dished out like candy to children who they get funneled through a system I just described?
Well, look, if you look at, in the United States at least, poor kids and kids of so-called color are much more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. And no child should be forced to take medication. And medication are never the final answer. At the very most, they're a stopgap. There's no proof whatsoever that medications help anybody heal from ADHD. They simply suppress symptoms. which may be helpful in the short term, but for God's sakes, go to work on the long-term development of that child.
In 2007, 4.8% of kids were on ADHD medication. By 2011, that number had climbed to 6.1%. It's likely even higher now.
I mean, boomers, the older generation, has never had this issue because many of the chemicals in food never actually existed in their generation. Their food was far higher quality. They weren't raised on stimulants. They weren't raised on so much processed garbage. They had healthier diets, healthier classrooms, healthier lifestyles, and hope for a future with a big house in a healthy, patriotic society. However, one of the main driving forces that is damaging America's youth has to be the rise of culture-polluting algorithms. Although we all use social media, the United States' relationship with it deserves closer attention. With 302 million users, the United States has the third largest social media audience in the world, after China and India. In other words, over 91% of the US population actively uses social media. And it's important to remember that both India and China have 3 times the population of America, so we really shouldn't be surprised that they have higher social media use. It's also important to remember that both countries don't allow citizens access to TikTok, arguably the most destructive social media app in existence. And this is a worrying pattern in America, as social media use is intimately associated with diminished cognitive abilities. According to this paper, associations between social media use and cognitive abilities, with results from a large-scale study of adolescents, included lower intelligence levels, poor information processing abilities, and lower levels of spatial perception. And if it's not Mark Zuckerberg's global social media empire that is destroying the mental health of young Americans in a way we can't even comprehend, there's also foreign adversaries like China using TikTok to reduce our attention spans down to the size of goldfish, whilst controlling the information diet of every young American across the country. Depression in younger people is skyrocketing, anxiety is skyrocketing, all manner of mental health issues, even ones spurred on by TikTok trends like Tourette's.
There's no doubt it's a very real mental health condition. And even more bizarrely, it seems popular TikTok videos are playing a role in it.
All of our data being harvested, everything we like and learn, everything we say to our friends and family, all being chopped up and distributed for a profit. We have military and business leaders who hate America and the West doing everything they can to harm the future generations of America, and this is being passively accepted across most of the Western world. As the psychologist Jonathan Haidt highlighted in a widely read essay, there are 3 primary reasons why societies thrive: social capital, like inclusive communities, social networks with elevated levels of trust, robust institutions, and common narratives. The influence of social media, he argued, has harmed and continues to harm all 3. And he's right. Real news has been replaced by fake news. The truth replaced by my truth. George Carlin even once called America one big shopping mall.
Only a nation of unenlightened half-wits could have taken this beautiful place and turned it into what it is today, a shopping mall. A big f***ing shopping mall.
One big commercial cesspool. A place where people mindlessly shop, eat and distract themselves with things that when examined closely add little or no value to one's life. And more concerningly, very few actually leave the cesspool. They rarely ever travel to foreign lands. The manifest destiny spirit of America is being reduced, which is one of the key values that made America so prosperous to begin with. There's barely any passing reason for young people to leave the house today. At least with malls, you actually had to go out of the house to indulge in consumerism. Today it's all there waiting for you at the push of a button. Food, clothes and the necessities are readily available whenever you want. As is everything else you don't really need. Temu is just the latest, more concentrated version of a mega mall drug, a kind of shotgun approach to filling the bottomless pit of buying stuff. It doesn't matter that the junk you buy is going to break after a month if it even works at all. It doesn't matter that it might be made by slaves or that it really serves no purpose. It doesn't need to be something you even like in general. What matters is the act of consuming, the way it makes you feel and the dopamine you get from it. That's why everything it seems in our society, even shopping, has drifted from quality to gamifying the process and making it as addictive and easy as possible. But we shouldn't end this video on such a nihilistic note. As the philosopher Hegel argued, in the phenomenology of spirit, each generation of humanity offers specific knowledge that can enhance our societies. There is wisdom at every stage in history, and by studying the eras of our great-grandfathers, we can identify what is missing in our societies and compensate for the blind spots of the present. The traditional values that built America, logic, hard work, discipline, a strong moral code and faith, begin to swing back when its absence produces a societal vacuum. The steps to building a great civilization is painful. The transition periods through growth, whilst painful, show things are moving forward where they should be going. Hegel referred to this process as the dialectic. When society adjusts to big changes, these growth pains are natural. It's only through moving era to era in society that new solutions and a better society emerges. That's why we need to make changes to the way we're going, banning the toxic chemicals in food that poisons the youth every day, ban phone usage in schools, moderate algorithms and their dangers, praise our history and culture in schools and universities, a general push to connect with other members of society, an incentivization for bringing communities together, investing in outdoor facilities for everyone, to remind America and the rest of the West youth what they're fighting for, giving them economic hope and prosperity in face of a horrible economic outlook. Only when these toxic pressures are relieved can America's trajectory be overturned and accelerated. And it seems increasingly more and more people online are aware of this. There is a positive trend rising from the surface, and if this continues, we will see society thrive, but only once these fixes are implemented. As the Greek proverb goes, a society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they will never sit.